When you look back after a number of years at MVP, I guess it's similar with every product that has survived kind of on the market and is actually continues to live. It's like you look at your MVP and you're like, how was it even possible that anybody found this interesting? The type of a tool that Semaphore is generally supposed to support every way of building software, right? But, we just said we have no idea how to do that. We don't have time. So let's just support what we were working with, which is Ruby on Rails web applications. I'm Marko Anastasov, co-founder of Semaphore.
This is Code Story, a podcast bringing you interviews with tech visionaries who share in the critical moments of what it takes to change an industry and build and lead a team that has your back. I'm your host, Noah Lappart, and today how Marko Anastasov built a better way to build, test, and integrate your code. All this and more on Code Story. Marko Anastasov has been working with computers for a long time. He grew up in former Yugoslavia in the 90s, when there was civil war, hyperinflation, and the economy was taken back 20 years. His father was an electronics guy, so there was always a computer around the house. He found himself fascinated with information and the things you could conjure up on the magic screens. And he found that computers were a place you could build things that were not influenced by the outside world. As a kid, he played sports, mainly volleyball. He's taken many lessons from his time playing volleyball, where a group of people have a shared sense of purpose driving towards a goal. While building applications under the guise of his web development agency, Render Text, he and his fellow builders saw a need to have a way of automating the processes of building, testing, and integrating, and doing so fast. This is the creation story of Semaphore.
Semaphore is a cloud-based product for technology companies, so our customers are software development teams, and Semaphore helps them automate the processes of testing and deploying code. That's kind of a big deal these days because, software is built collaboratively. The problem that people need to solve is how do you build software together, multiple people adding new code to applications. How do we make sure that everything's actually working, right? So that's why in modern software development, there is an emerging practice of, automating various phases of testing and delivering basically applications to end users and customers. So we help them do that productively because our product is taking care of that whole aspect of building software for them. Prior to creating Semaphore, we were a small web development consultancy. Our company was called Render Text. It's still called like that, but Semaphore is what more known now in the world. In our practice of basically building applications for clients, typically like small startups, we basically saw a need to have a way of automating these processes of testing and integrating software together. Back then, it was like there were already emerging products. So this was around 2010, 2011. For example, GitHub was already established as a major improvement for software development online. On the other hand, you already had like easy, convenient platforms for deploying code, such as Heroku, but there was nothing that really helped developers build and test their code really fast with a similar user experience. So, the state of the art was installing an open source piece of software called Jenkins on a server, which the developer have to buy and maintain and scale and, figure out how the upgrade process works. So, long story short, it took me 3 days to set up one project that we were working on this way. And, we just thought like, there has to be a better way to do this, and we didn't find anything out there. And because we were all also on the lookout to eventually become a product company, we decided to try to build something that's hopefully simple and fast initially, just for our needs, and see if the rest of the world will find it useful. And fortunately, they did.
Well, tell me about the MVP. So tell me about that first product you built, how long it took you to build, and what sort of tools you used to bring it to life.
Our technology stack was mainly using the Ruby programming language and Ruby on Rails web development framework. That was kind of the foundation. Another thing was the fact that, GitHub, kudos to them, had a pretty comprehensive and open API, which we could rely on to, get notified whenever, something changes in the source code. That was basically it. Ruby on Rails, I guess we used, I don't know if Bootstrap was around for, the CSS framework. And that's it. Like the important kind of component in this thing that Semaphore does, which is in development circles known as continuous integration. Today, you might also call it CI/CD, which is short for continuous integration and continuous delivery. You have to have usually a beefy machine where you execute the code, execute the tests. And so we're also figuring out how the user interface, which we were building, was orchestrating these basically jobs of executing other people's code. That was kind of the other component. And we decided, because, we're big fans of like speed and not waiting for stuff. So one of the early decisions was that Semaphore has to be very fast and give you feedback very quickly, like as soon as possible. So we decided to kind of go against the trend of, doing everything with cloud computing and actually run our users' workflows on bare metal hardware. So this is one of the basically the primary reason why Semaphore has always been kind of the fastest product in the space. But for that, you just kind of had to pick initially a provider to help you with that and move on. So I guess the general advice is, Ruby on Rails was extremely helpful, and that culture of kind of getting things done and not overcomplicating things.
Well, with any MVP, you have to make certain decisions and trade-offs, right? You got to cut a feature, or you got to accept technical debt. Tell me about some of those decisions and trade-offs that you had to make and how you coped with those decisions.
When you look back after a number of years at MVP, I guess it's similar with every product that has survived kind of on the market and is actually continues to live. It's like you look at your MVP and you're like, how was it even possible that anybody found this interesting? Because it was really stripped down. So, Semaphore, the type of a tool that Semaphore is generally supposed to, let's say, support, in theory, every programming language and every operating system and every way of building software, right? But, we just said we have no idea how to do that. We don't have time. So let's just, support what we were, working with and what also happened to be pretty popular in the world at that time. To a large extent it still is, which is, Ruby on Rails web applications. Our kind of mission for the MVP was that it should just work. So it should take you like maybe 5 clicks to set up a working continuous testing process for a Ruby on Rails applications. And that's it.
So from that point, right, you got your MVP and you start to progress the product, right? You start to mature it. How did you go about that process, and how did you build your roadmap and decide, okay, this is the next most important thing to build?
I kind of remember there were immediately many potential areas we could go to and branch into. Generally, Semaphore is a type of application or a system which is a little maybe more complex than a typical kind of software as a service web app, where there's a web application with a user interface and some workflows and a database. We kind of had all that in our MVP, but we also had this pool of actual machines where we were supposed to be running our customers' source code, and every customer has a different applications with different requirements, different dependencies. That system where that stuff runs is, it's supposed to be very, highly available and reliable. I guess that in the beginning, we were already kind of balancing improving the overall user experience of the application. So, for example, in the MVP, just to give a concrete example, I remember that when you would run something on Semaphore, you saw no output about what was happening. It was like, we're running some stuff for you, a spinner was going around, and like, hang tight, we're gonna let you know when it's done. It was like, it was okay for the MVP, but it had to kind of evolve and actually show some output to people and so on. So while on the other hand, actually our backend system where we were actually executing stuff for our users was everything but stable and rock solid. So we were actually manually kind of behind the scenes watching almost every workflow that was running and manually restarting servers and just kind of keeping the system up and running with bare hands and duct tape. There was just work to make it better than that eventually. On the kind of bigger time horizon, Semaphore has evolved to support other programming languages. Nowadays we also support macOS and have Windows on the roadmap. We've basically invested 10 years in the dark magic of making the system highly reliable and available so that for our users it's really rock solid experience. But generally navigating that large space of potential things to work on is always a challenge. One kind of systematic decision that we made early on was to operate as a bootstrapped company, so to be completely funded by basically our customers and what we can do based on that. So that meant that we could not immediately like blitz scale and hire solve problem by just adding people and adding people. Kind of had to be frugal and work with people who are like-minded in the sense that they just like the working on this problem space and on this application. I guess almost every job application nowadays says that we're looking for a self-managed person and stuff like that, but that's really one of the kind of core requirements for us, because we just didn't, for a long time we basically had no managers, just people making stuff together.
Let's switch to team. So how did you go about building your team, and what did you look for in those people to indicate that they were the winning horses to join you?
So when we started Semaphore, we were, just for context, like we were, pretty young, and although we operated a small agency for a few years, this was literally our first years of just professional experience. So I'm sure that we made, despite best intentions, a lot of kind of mistakes, or didn't do some things quickly enough in terms of kind of structuring the team or realizing what are the bottlenecks and what is the right kind of role to expand with next and so on. So I guess as the organization evolves, you're always looking for, you're always trying to level up the whole organization, including yourself. As a leader of the company, you have all the context of what was kind of happening before, how things were done before, and it's kind of your job to figure out what is always know kind of what's the next level in every department, in every kind of type of work that your organization needs to do. So the ideal scenario is when you basically go for, like in our case, we went from none of us really knew what we were doing, but we made something that was useful, and we were just kind of learning from primarily user feedback and iterating on that, to actually having a clue how a proper product company should be structured, and what are some skill sets across departments that you're supposed to have in place in order to actually deliver the right set of values to your customers, from customer support to product. It's a million small iterations all over the years.
As you grew, as you have grown, did the criteria change in what you looked for in people, or how you protected that, creative team culture?
Kind of as I was saying before, we really did not build for scale in the early days, like in the sense that for the product of our type, you always have to do some capacity planning. So even when we were launching and there was nobody else but us using, like on day one, and slowly you kind of start getting people in. We always had to make sure that we have, some additional capacity from whatever it was the user base at, a given point in time. 2 weeks from launch, if we had 20 people using Semaphore, we kind of had to make sure that the system is ready for 50, and just went, step by step in that kind of spirit. I think we were fortunate to never really had idle time, in the sense like when we launched MVP, and because we were, obviously part of the developer community, at least in the Ruby on Rails space, so we knew kind of where people hung out and what are, relevant channels and newsletters and so on. So we were able to spread the word pretty quickly, and we got, the initial set of users, pretty much as soon as we launched. We were always driven by, whatever needs they had or whatever problems they were, running into. We just didn't have time to kind of daydream about some scale that was too far ahead, and we were just kind of building for one step ahead of today.
This episode is sponsored by Vanta. You're a startup founder. Finding product market fit is probably your number one priority. But to land bigger customers, you also need security compliance. And obtaining your SOC 2 or ISO 27001 certification can open those big doors. But they take time and energy, pulling you away from building and shipping. And that's where Vanta comes in. Vanta is the all-in-one compliance solution helping startups like yours get audit ready and build a strong security foundation quickly and painlessly. How, you ask? Vanta automates the manual security tasks that slow you down, helping you streamline your audit. And the platform connects you with trusted vCISOs to build your program, auditors to get you through audits quickly, and a marketplace for essentials like pen testing. Join over 8,000 companies, including many Y Combinator and Techstars startups who trust Vanta. Simplify compliance and get $1,000 off at vanta.com/codestory. That's vanta.com/codestory. This episode is sponsored by Kinsta. Between juggling client meetings, managing your website, and keeping up with everyday tasks, who has the time to stress out about website security? Well, with Kinsta, the technical stuff is taken care of, so you can focus on what you do best. Kinsta provides managed hosting for WordPress, offering lightning-fast load times, top-tier security, and unmatched human-only customer support. Whether you're a business owner, web developer, or running a digital agency, Kinsta makes managing your website easy and efficient. Kinsta provides enterprise-grade security, being one of the few hosting providers for WordPress with SOC 2 and other certifications, guaranteeing the highest level of security for your website. Thanks to their unlimited free expert-led migrations, Kinsta ensures a smooth transition for you from other hosting providers. Customers have reported 200% faster load times post-migration to their platform. What I find cool about Kinsta is their fast and reliable customer service and premium features that are included at no extra cost. Ready to experience Kinsta's hosting for yourself? Get your first month free when you sign up at kinsta.com today. That's KINSTA.com. Let's flip to scalability. So did you build this to scale efficiently from day one, or were you fighting this as you grew?
I mean, today with all the, cloud computing power at your fingertips, I think the conversation is different from like maybe mid-2000s, where there's this website, maybe it's still around, called High Scalability or something like that, and it was like they would publish these articles that were pretty elaborate, like this is how Flickr is managing 5 terabytes of photos, and it was like, because there were just a couple of websites in the world who operated at relatively large scale, it was like fascinating to read. And because there was like actually no cloud computing, it was a story of people building their actual data centers and working on both hardware and software. But if you fast forward today, like there's so much software has been created that from load balancers to API gateways and so on, which you can just use, and which didn't exist before. And that's on top of cloud computing. So I think scale is even maybe a shouldn't really be a topic like for most people getting started today.
Well, as you step out on the balcony and you look across all you've built with Semaphore, what are you most proud of?
I'm always like the most excited when I hear about basically, as simple as it sounds, like that there's a new company, and it doesn't have to be kind of famous or anything, just that somehow I have an image in my head like what they are and what they do, and it's somehow, I get that through whatever way, whether it's a notification or a support request or something, or somebody wrote a nice tweet, and just knowing that product that we've created is helping real people out there do great things at their jobs. And because at its core, Semaphore is kind of like a productivity tool, but for developers. And knowing that, we created something which helps, thousands of developers across the globe build useful things a little bit better than they used to before using Semaphore, it just makes me immensely proud.
Well, let's flip the script a little bit, Marko. Tell me about a mistake you made and how you and your team responded to it.
Yeah, so I'll tell you a story which is maybe can be a showcase of two types of things that I would avoid. One is a tiny company partnering with a very large company, or at least it's how it's pitched. And another is investing in developing basically a feature of your product, which is something completely foreign to how everything else works. Was not really part of the plan. So there was a time when we were basically approached by a very large company to engage in they would call it a partnership, which required us to build a new feature, which for us was a pretty large feature. Like we had to invest significant time and effort into it. And the promise was that we would be, featured by that large company as a partner, and we would be a part of a new marketplace that the company was launching. And so, it seemed like a great idea. The company was, highly popular back then, seemed to be on everything was kind of going up and up with them. And, internally, like we had some things going on and obviously development in progress, but, because this seemed like a great opportunity, we took some people off the projects they were working on. And basically we did, eventually implement this thing, which was completely kind of not really integrated in the whole story of Semaphore as it was back then. It ended up that, this marketplace has completely flopped because the big company has changed its priorities, like over the course of maybe 2 months or 3 months. Effectively, like, some of our plans were taken maybe 6 months on hold, and we invested a lot of time into building something that was not really useful. There was no really market for that at the moment, and even before we launched that, like the person who was kind of leading this partnership project was left that big company, and it kind of taught us a few lessons. Like one is, don't build things that are like breaking the wholeness of your product. This is a whole other thing, but I learned a lot from Christopher Alexander, who's an architect, and talks a lot about why some things feel good or look good and kind of feel like they have life and some others don't. The concepts of wholeness and are part of that, but basically it means that there was like a new branch which was completely going in another direction, not very developed. We spent a lot of time. We were basically ghosted by this large company because as a tiny company you're just nothing to them really. So it's a lesson of focus and kind of staying on your track, I guess.
Well, what does the future look like for Semaphore, for the product, and for your team?
Semaphore has recently gone through a major transition. Since there were a couple of years when we had Semaphore, which we now call Semaphore Classic, and kind of in late 2018 we, driven by, in large part, customer feedback, generally changes in the developer tools industry, we changed the course a little bit and built a whole new product, which initially we called Semaphore 2.0. mainly to basically escape the dead end that the previous Semaphore was, because there were many types of applications and workflows that the product, the way it was designed, was just not capable of running, because we wanted to grow with our customers and not have every single one of them tell us, look guys, we outgrew you, and so we cannot really use Semaphore anymore. We wanted to build something that is still really fast and simple to use, hopefully, but something that no organization can really outgrow. And the future for us means continuing down that path of expanding the scope of types of workflows that we can run for developers. We've just launched support for monorepos, which is like when you have multiple projects in one Git repository, something that's emerged as a trend because of, on one hand, microservices, on the other hand, like a lot of advancement in the front end. On the other, we kind of want to explore further what a CI/CD tool like Semaphore can do in terms of providing insights and feedback to developers beyond, hey, your tests have passed or your tests have failed. So giving people tips on what makes their code faster or slower, or what are the moments when the quality of your code is potentially decreasing, and overall just giving you a sense of how productive is your overall software development process in your team.
Well, let's switch to you, Marko. Who influences the way that you work? Name a CEO, CTO, architect, really any person, or lots of people. Name a person you look up to and why.
I specifically remember back, at a point before even Semaphore existed, or even the ADA, I think, there was a conference dedicated to basically motivating developers and maybe to some extent also designers to build their own products and build businesses around them and run them as independent businesses, without the requests and constraints of venture capital and so on. So it was a place where people from companies like GitHub, the GitHub CEO from back then was there speaking, the Shopify CEO. And it was incredibly inspiring because they just kind of spoke just like regular people, like, hey, we're builders. Basically the message was like, if you figure out something that's useful to others, just build it, and you don't need to rule the world with that. You just need, even 100 people who are passionate about it, and you have independence, you have a meaning, you have something to hold on to and build upon. So that kind of ethos and was highly influential, and it kind of stayed with me over the years. I'll say, despite the recent controversies, but the Basecamp folks have been really influential as well, because back then kind of there was many things seemed more complicated than they could have been, and the approach of kind of just focusing on simplicity and in every aspect of building the product or structuring your organization seemed like a breath of fresh air. So I mentioned a bit earlier Christopher Alexander, who is actually an architect. I remember, reading many programming books over the years which referenced his work, which would always be like, oh, he was the guy who came up with the idea of patterns, like patterns in architecture, and that inspired the idea of basically patterns in software development. I actually read not his work about patterns, but about, I don't know, on top of my head, like there's one called The Phenomenon of Life, which was highly influential because it kind of explained to me why some things feel good, like in the actually external physical world. And for example, you would see like a house from maybe built in late 19th century somewhere, wherever, and you would just feel like, oh, this is such a nice thing, And then you would see this maybe like some kind of a brutalist building with just flat walls and like white and gray, or it would be like in a weird shape, like with sharp angles and stuff. And although it's interesting, it's kind of like you don't feel anything when you see it, like if you like just realize it. So there's actually logic like why this is happening. he basically created a theory which decomposes this in the world of buildings and interior space. But I think it kind of applies in software development as well. So the way I think of it is like, let's say you built a product that's like MVP doing one feature. Basically, it's like one feature. Maybe to use a concrete example, maybe it's like a calendar to book meetings or podcast appearances. And it's like you have that feature that it works great. There's maybe 10% of things you could add. And then there's like, okay, how does the product further evolve? You could add something that really complements the original feature and in a way makes it even more useful than it was. So for example, you could build in a way for people to leave you a tip or pay you. So this way the tool suddenly becomes like something that professionals can use alone as a way of providing professional consulting services, right? Or you could say, no, it's actually what's really interesting is let's build event management system on top of that. And then you're like, these things are not like, they kind of related, but not very much. And you end up with two things that are probably going to be underdeveloped, not very cohesive. And when you add a couple of those in your product, you just basically end up in a really bad place because things stop making sense, and nothing feels like, the whole product doesn't feel like a whole. It's in my experience, it's really easy to add things that maybe make sense, but that don't really complement each other as much as they could. That kind of naturally leads to underdevelopment and just a lot of debt that inhibits your potential down the road. So this has been literally like one of the ideas that changed how I see the world.
Well, we talked about mistakes, but a little bit different spin. If you could go back to the beginning, what would you do differently, or where would you consider taking a different approach?
When you have the constraints of a bootstrap company, you don't really have the luxury of hiring somebody as soon as there is a need to get some job done, right? Because you have to operate within profitability. So in practice, that ends up meaning that probably the founder or the founders will wear really many hats, and also early employees. While that's necessary, it's also necessary to be very proactive in basically protecting the company in a way from having certain functions, kind of taken by somebody, whoever that is, who cannot dedicate themselves 100% to that function. Being aware of, as simple as it sounds, like being aware of what functions your company has to have, and being aware of where do you have somebody who's really dedicated to that function, and where do you just kind of have somebody filling in just to kind of hold water. Knowing the difference between that and working to improve. There were cases where I kind of wished like we realized it sooner. I think there's a lot of maybe glorification is not the right word, but in the world of kind of startups, I guess, there is the typical story is somehow that, people just kind of figure out everything on their own. And there's actually very little structured learning about how to maybe just run a business or, build a product or overall structure responsibilities or scale the team and so on. So in my personal case, I wish that I maybe spent less time reading fragmented, and highly contextual advice from random blogs on the internet, and just maybe picked one or two books that kind of gave a framework of how to structure, how to run a company, and just go with that. For example, I think there's a book called Scaling Up, which can be really useful to, regardless of kind of the size of your company or your business. There's a lot of kind of good advice there that everybody can find.
Well, last question, Marko. So you're getting on a plane and you're sitting next to a young entrepreneur who's built the next big thing. They're jazzed about it. They can't wait to show it off to the world. Can't wait to show it off to you right there in the plane. What advice do you give that person having gone down this road a bit?
My advice would be to never lose focus from customers. from your customers, basically. There is a tremendous amount of distractions that the world is going to present to you, both internally in the company and externally. But if you are truly kind of focused on your customer and understanding them, and because you've already built that thing, you're already a creative person. You've proven that, so you will be able to figure out further innovations based on the needs that you will understand from your customers. But it's very important that you think about your customers basically every day and not get distracted by anything else.
That's great advice. Well, Marko, thank you for being on the show today. Thank you for telling the creation story of Semaphore.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. I hope some entrepreneurs out there will find something that they can apply in their lives.
And this concludes another chapter of Code Story. Code Story is hosted and produced by Noah Labhart. Be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or the podcasting app of your choice. Support the show on patreon.com/codestory for just $5 to $10 a month. And when you get a chance, leave us a review. Both things help us out tremendously. And thanks again for listening.
You just realized your business needed to hire someone yesterday. How can you find amazing candidates fast? Easy. Just use Indeed. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other job sites. With Indeed sponsored jobs, your post jumps to the top of the page for your relevant candidates, so you can reach the people you want faster. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs posted directly on Indeed have 45% more applications than non-sponsored jobs. Don't wait any longer. Speed up your hiring right now with Indeed. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/PODKATZ13. Just go to Indeed.com/PODKATZ13 right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring? Indeed is all you need.